Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of Super Deep Movie Analysis. I'm actor and screenwriter Lec Zorn, and as you can probably tell, I'm currently in the spirit of auto racing. Later today is the 100th Indianapolis 500, just about 2 or 3 miles away from me. I'll be attending for the 17th consecutive year. Um, a lot of people are making a big deal out of this being the 100th, but to me, that's not a big deal except to the extent that it increases visibility of the race. I just love open wheel racing in general and the 500 in particular. And as I said, this is my 17th consecutive year attending, and I plan to continue for the rest of my life. And it's something I look forward to every year about as much as Christmas. In fact, I often say, with all due respect to Andy Williams, this is the most wonderful time of the year. And, I'm already prepared with my Indianapolis Motor Speedway baseball cap, my headphones that I'll listen to the race on, my Michael Schumacher jacket, my ticket holder, and my ticket to the race. In fact, these are probably the coolest tickets that have ever been printed for any event. And in celebration of this being Indianapolis 500 Day, I'm super deep analyzing my all-time favorite auto racing movie, the 2001 drama Driven. Well, back in 2004, a few weeks before that year's 500, I was surprised to see an open-wheel racing movie start on regular TV. The subject matter instantly grabbed my attention. I watched the movie and liked it so much that I bought the DVD shortly afterward. Driven is a very good state-of-the-art drama that captures the essence of the sport both on and off the track. It focuses on one season of a league whose name is never mentioned. The movie opens with a collage of races. The league's champion from the previous year, German Beau Brandenburg, played by Schweiger, starts strong but loses ground to a surprising rookie named Jimmy Bly, played by Pardue. That takes us to about the midway point of the season, and then we learn a lot about the two drivers as people. We see that Jimmy is overwhelmed by his sudden and unexpected fame. He feels overwhelmed as if he's being pulled in several directions at once, pressured to win, to accommodate the media and endorse products while pursued by many adoring female fans. His manager and older brother Demille, played by Leonard, is very stern and controlling, trying to keep the overwhelmed Jimmy balanced and focused. Meanwhile, Brandenburg is deeply concerned about his recent struggles and blames them on lack of focus caused by his relationship with his girlfriend of 3 years, Sophia, played by Estella Warren. Telling her that she's a distraction, he breaks up with her, causing her devastation. Jimmy wins the next race to regain his place on top of the series from Brandenburg, but the owner of Jimmy's team, Carl Henry, played by Burt Reynolds, feels that Jimmy is unfocused and that the team's other driver, Memo, played by Cristián de la Fuente, isn't blocking for Jimmy as instructed. So Carl calls Joe Tanto, played by Sylvester Stallone, who also wrote the movie. Joe hasn't raced since a near-fatal racing accident 4 years earlier. Joe replaces Memo and mentors Jimmy. Carl is very stern, no nonsense, and a tough competitor. He's paralyzed from the waist down, which is implied to be the result of a racing accident. Perhaps his insatiable motivation to win was fueled by losing his driving career, and his forcefulness is compensation for losing his physical strength. But now that Sophia is no longer distracting Brandenburg, she begins distracting Jimmy as he pursues her, and she accepts. In Joe's first race back, Carl makes Joe pit unnecessarily. Joe expresses displeasure but understands Carl's strategy and grudgingly goes along with it. Carl then makes the pit crew hold Joe until Carl orders them to release Joe, timing it so that he blocks Brandenburg, which leads to Jimmy winning. Despite the rivalry between Jimmy and Brandenburg, however, Joe and Brandenburg have been friends for many years. The two discuss Brandenburg's recent struggles, and Joe encourages Brandenburg to seek reconciliation with Sophia. He does so at a convention in Chicago, and she accepts, breaking up with Jimmy on the spot. He's devastated, gets into one of the prototypes, and drives away with it. Joe gets in another of the prototypes and follows Jimmy, trying to stop him. The two drive through the streets of the city, and amazingly, no one is killed or even injured. It's a scene that's very far-fetched, but equally entertaining. And, certainly Jimmy has the type of emotional and impulsive personality that he might be tempted to do something like that if he could, or at least drive recklessly in a regular car. So at least the emotions of the scene do fit the situation. When Jimmy gets out of the car, he's confronted by Joe. Jimmy says he wants to fight Brandenburg, but Joe calms Jimmy down and then gives us a Rocky-type moment. Joe gives Jimmy the first trophy that Joe ever won, saying that the race was probably the last time he felt pure victory as he was driving then, simply because he loved it, and that Jimmy needs to get back to that. Joe adds that he doesn't have Jimmy's talent, but does have two things that Jimmy doesn't: will and faith. And the plot element, by the way, of Joe giving giving the first trophy he ever won to Jimmy reminds me of in Rocky V, when you see a flashback of Mickey giving Rocky something that had been given to Mickey, a cufflink that had been given to Mickey by Rocky Marciano, and then Rocky thinks about passing it along to Tommy Gunn, and then ends up passing it on to Rocky Jr. in an emotional last scene, which looked like it was going to be the last scene of the series, but unfortunately wasn't. So anyway, back to Driven. Surprisingly, Jimmy and Joe are merely fined $25,000, not suspended, as they probably would be in real life. With only 2 races left in the season, now Carl thinks he's... with only 2 races left in the season, now Carl has been getting increasingly pessimistic about Jimmy. Now thinking that Joe can help Jimmy more off the track than on, Carl replaces Joe with Memo for the next race on a road course in Brandenburg's native Germany. Jimmy takes the lead and Memo is in second place. However, rather than follow Carl's orders to block for Jimmy, Memo tries to take the lead and is encouraged to do so by his wife, who is seated in the owner's booth with Carl, and who also has a microphone. And I don't know how realistic the scenario is where you'd have, 2 people in the booth, giving, opposite instructions to the driver, but, it's a very well acted scene and is certainly entertaining. And Reynolds has a lot of great moments in this movie, and, especially when he shouts at Memo's wife to shut up. I mean, it's very, very well acted. So anyway, Memo crashes and his car lands upside down in a pond adjacent to the track, while the car leaks explosive fluids. First Jimmy and then Brandenburg stop racing and rescue Memo just in time, though Jimmy sustains a foot injury. Memo and Jimmy are hospitalized and visited by a now humble Brandenburg, who was deeply affected by the near-fatal accident. Tension between Jimmy and Brandenburg now easing, Brandenburg said he did not want to win the championship this way. Carl tells Joe that Carl won't be bringing Jimmy back to the team next year as he lacks mental toughness, citing as an example removing himself from the race in Germany. Joe protests that Jimmy saved Memo's life, but Carl angrily refuses to reconsider. He says he hopes to sign Beau for next season, though doesn't address that Beau, Brandenburg that is, also removed himself from the race in Germany, which Carl is using as part of his justification for removing Jimmy. Carl also adds that Demille is trying to help lure Brandenburg to the team. Sophia gives the latter piece of information to Jimmy, who is furious with his brother, leading to an emotional argument between the two. Demille believes that Jimmy isn't equipped to take care of himself, and Jimmy very much wants the respect of his older brother. Furthermore, earlier in the movie, it's revealed that Demille pursued a career in auto racing, but was far less talented in that field than was Jimmy. Perhaps that created jealousy that makes Demille so much want to control his brother. This leads to a climax in which the winner of the championship completely earned it. The loser recognizes what matters most in his life, and a couple of hardened skeptics are proven wrong. I think some sports movies are easy to like even if you're not a fan of the sport that the movie is about. For example, I'm a huge fan of the Rocky series, even though I rarely watch boxing. And while I am a huge football fan, I think a lot of non football fans would like the high school football drama, All the Right Moves, which I plan to do an episode on in the near future, probably around the start of the high school football season in August. But while Driven has several universal themes, such as the need to prove ourselves and to be loved and respected, auto racing is so dominant a theme in the movie. I don't think a lot of non auto racing fans would like the movie, but I think most auto racing fans will like it, as I do. One thing that helps tremendously is that director Renny Harlin is a zealous auto racing fan. He's a native of Finland, which might be which might lead the world in auto racing fans per capita. In fact, I think that auto racing is actually bigger than soccer over there, which it would, in that if that's the case, it might be the only country in Europe in which soccer is not the number one sport. In fact, in the DVD commentary, Harlan mentioned that of Finland's 5 million residents, 35,000 a few years ago went to the Formula One race in Budapest, Hungary, and that would be the equivalent of 2 million Americans going to another country to go to some sporting event. So Harlan clearly was extremely passionate about this movie, and it shows. He shot 1 million feet of film and has a personal cut of the movie that's 4.5 hours long. As it is, the commercial cut is 1 hour and 57 minutes, less than half the length of Harlan's cut. I suspect that Harlan's cut contains more scenes between Joe and a female journalist named Lucretia Clan, played by Stacy Edwards. Luke, as she's usually referred to, is covering the team for the season. She and Joe share a brief kiss on the lips near the end, implying that the characters had a romantic relationship that was largely cut out of the movie. That reminds me of a similar situation in the movie Hoosiers, in which Gene Hackman and Barbara Hershey kiss near the end, and it turned out that they had a much more overtly developed romance than came through in the final cut. And a lot of things in Hoosiers were cut for time, as was the case in Driven. It was also mentioned that Memo's wife, Cathy, played by Gina Gershon, is Joe's ex-wife, although Joe and Memo still are friends. I suspect the mention of Memo being married to Joe's ex-wife was meant to be a bigger plot element. It just wouldn't make sense, at least to me, to just mention it once and then just don't do anything with it. So that was probably something that was cut for time. And finally, in the audio commentary, Harlan said that the character known only as Crusher had a much bigger role in the commercial. Harlan in the audio commentary said that the character known only as Crusher had a much bigger role than the commercial cut shows. Crusher is one of Carl's assistants. He's played by Brent Briscoe, who is also in the 2005 hydroplane racing drama, which was filmed largely in my hometown of Madison, Indiana, and which I plan to feature in an upcoming episode. In the movie, Madison Briscoe plays a real-life hydroplane mechanic for Madison's hometown boat, the Miss Madison, named Tony Steinhardt. Though I don't know how much the character is actually based on the real person, since the movie was largely fictionalized. But anyway, back again to Driven. One thing I love about the movie is that it does an outstanding job showing what auto racing is like, both from a driver's and a fan's perspective. The auto racing scenes are spectacularly shot, and many of the other scenes are shot at racetracks. For example, several times some of the main characters are talking at a track that's open for practice or qualifying while thousands of fans are walking by. I love hanging out at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during the pre-race events, including going down to the pits and back to the garages, as much as I'm allowed access during the practice and qualifying sessions. And the movie also does a great job portraying behind the scenes happenings in the sport, such as owners hiring and firing drivers and the struggle of drivers to balance their personal and professional lives. Um, and being here in Indianapolis, I see auto racing news all the time. So, um, with that and all the shots at the track and the racing scenes, this movie makes me feel so much at home. And it's something that if you aren't that much involved in the sport, I think you can still like the movie, but you probably just won't feel so much at home, like the movie is so much a part of you as I do with this one. Um, though the name of the league in the movie, as I said earlier, is never mentioned, the auto racing scenes were filmed at kart races. Kart stands for Championship Auto Racing Teams, and that league sanctioned the Indianapolis 500 until the formation of the IndyCar series in 1996, creating an acrimonious split that was very harmful to the sport. Kart later changed its name to Champ Car World Series, which was absorbed by the IndyCar series in 2008. Um, Among the real life auto racers who appear in the movie are four Indianapolis 500 winners: Dario Franchitti, Juan Pablo Montoya, Tony Kanaan, and Kenny Brack. Svenska Makt, that means Swedish power for those of you who don't know, which is probably 99.9% of you. And speaking of Juan Pablo Montoya, he won last year as well as in 2000, the first year I went to the race, having not missed one since. And Montoya is the one who's shown on the ticket. They always, every Indianapolis 500 ticket, always depicts the last year's winner. Um, Sylvester Stallone, of course, is no stranger to sports dramas, and it shows very clearly here. While this movie doesn't have as much of the in your face emotional power as does the Rocky series, Driven does nevertheless have some of the same themes. Furthermore, the movie is very realistic in most ways and avoids falling into the sports movie cliche of setting up the main character's rival as an evil villain who must be defeated for the good of mankind, which, as Michelle Gusso and I mentioned, was the case in Rocky 3, 4, and 5. In fact, not only is Beau Brandenburg not a villain, he doesn't even quite reach antagonist level. He's reminiscent of Mason the Line Dixon, Rocky's opponent in the movie Rocky Balboa, which was released 5 years later, 5 years after Driven. Um, Dixon, while not very likable, is portrayed as a tough competitor who is an unhappy person and maybe feels empty inside. And like the Rocky movies, Driven places heavy emphasis on relationships between the characters, which is something I always love. I think life is all about relationships. I remember once when I was traveling through, I was on a cross country road trip passing through Boise, Idaho, and talked to a friend of mine there. He took me to his church, and their website was actually it'sallabout.relationships.com. And that's such a great URL. I mean, because that phrase, is so much my philosophy of life. Um, the movie is also helped by great performances from the entire cast, but my game ball goes to Burt Reynolds, who gives his best performance that I've ever seen. And I've never been that much of a fan of Reynolds, but he's outstanding here. He provokes sympathy because of his paralysis, while sometimes coming off as an arrogant, know-it-all jerk, though most people probably wouldn't hold that against him too much because of the mitigating circumstances. Sadly, Driven was not a commercial success, grossing $32 million in America and $54 million worldwide in its theatrical release on a budget of $94 million. Hopefully, however, many more auto racing fans will discover this underrated movie over the years. The movie is, of course, available on DVD, along with a full load of special features, including an outstanding audio commentary from director Renny Harlin, in which he talks not only a lot about the movie, but also gives a lot of insight into the sport of auto racing. Also included are 51 minutes of deleted and extended scenes with optional audio commentary from Stallone. Though I wish that Stallone had done a feature commentary as well as he did for the movies Rocky Balboa and Rambo, and then one of the standalone Rocky DVD, the original. And then in addition, the DVD also contains, let's see, the theatrical trailer as well as the video game trailer. There actually was a video game for Driven, which I guess didn't do very well, like the film didn't. And then there are also three different documentaries. One is cast and crew interviews, the other is the making of Driven, and finally conquering speed through live action and visual effects. So, you got a lot of bang for your buck with this DVD. I recommend it highly. So, in conclusion, Driven has a few flaws, but overall it's a very good sports drama, and I strongly recommend it to auto racing fans. It currently has an IMDb rating of 4.5 out of 10, and I don't understand why it has such a low rating. I'm giving it an 8. 8 out of 10. So anyway, this concludes episode 15. Feel free to share this video. Feel free to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I cordially invite you to join me again in the near future for episode 16. And now I will hit the sack and try to get some sleep so that I'll be refreshed for my long day at the track, and hopefully we'll have an outstanding race. Hopefully the rain will hold off, and that we'll have an epic race that'll get more people interested in IndyCar, and the 500 in particular. So thanks again, and for Super Deep Movie Analysis, this is Lec Zorn. Good night.